Hello. Thank you for popping in. Today we're getting into some real basic science work, stuff that was really made for 12-year-old kids 80 years ago, but will be just as applicable today, if not more, and give you a little bit of background on some things, but we'll look at some historic texts that I think you'll find interesting. But first, an overview, get you into the spirit of things. It's been a while. So on our channel, we've covered a lot of really different things. So one of those things is the power of knowledge for how to build things. For example, how to make charcoal. We got right down to the basics of how do they make one of the foundational materials required for the industry that we've had for hundreds of years. And we did things like learn how that was built and learn how to harvest it and learn how to package it up and sell it, for example, and what they used to do. And we had some good old videos from Italy on that. Well, I'm not going to go through all the old videos that we've had, but I wanted to show the basic level of knowledge that's pretty much lost to most modern people. Don't have any clue where this comes from. They know they can go to a store and buy it in a bag and throw it in their barbecue if they so choose. Or just like where firewood comes from the store, but you might never go out and actually cut some yourself. Well, the sustainable communities around the world that have done it for hundreds of years had to figure out how. Similarly, we covered off how to chisel rock into a actual leveled block, and there was a whole technique there that I'd never even heard of about leveling and how do you put these bones on the corner, leveling bones and blocks and stuff. And it's just really fascinating. So the tradesmanship, craftsmanship that was kind of built up, protected and taught and passed on from generation to generation through the tradesmen and the guilds, etc., was pretty powerful. And then we jumped even, it seems like further ahead into the future, 1936, into flying airships. So we went from basic technology of the early 1900s to something so sci-fi as the Hindenburg and other Zeppelins. And there was a lot of other Zeppelins, by the way. This is the only one they ever talk about. We hinted a little bit at how some of that knowledge is kind of not like hidden maliciously, but it's just not part of the normal conversation when we talk about things being futuristic or being amazing and industrial or amazing technological feats. But we want to bring that kind of discussion back into public favor. Let's talk about what we can do instead of the things that we did do but don't want to do anymore or don't see as interesting. And to be able to do that, we require a basic level of science that for many school kids is not really part of their vocabulary. So here we looked at some light emitting tubes that were actually used for creating light to help heal people. The carbon arc lamp, for example, used for sanitation, and a bunch of other light-based UV discoveries that were made by men and women in shops, much like they used to have back then, but much like we don't have very many of today. You won't get to play with mercury in a chemical lab like you used to be able to, and you won't be able to buy a kit with radioactive stone in it or anything like that. But I wanted to, before we launched into today's, what we're going to look at today, I wanted to say, who were those people that built all those inventions? Well, this is a video from 1920 and 1930. These are the people that grew up to be the rocket scientists of the 40s. These are the ones that were reading, the books that taught them the fundamentals of science and philosophy and agriculture, and applied a lot of this stuff at home. Some of these were the inventors in the backyard working on things. Others were, laborers doing things, but they're all learning a certain level of education, maybe for the first time, but some would argue maybe it was even getting dumbed down by then, on purpose or otherwise, because they tended to put people into streams, right, and have certain purposes for their life. And that's where I came across and introduced the idea of the Boy Scout manuals and how packed full of knowledge and encouragement they were, from everything from civic duty to how to life-saving and how to grow food, how to cook food, how to survive, etc. All very powerful and important features that modern society would benefit from. So, which brings me to today's book, The Boy Scientist from 1955. There are multiple versions of this and multiple releases, and some of them going back to the 1910s. So this one I believe is 1955 because there are things mentioned in here from around that era. So let's just go to the cover, inside cover leaf here, just to see real quick. And anyway, these are the kinds of books that were on the bookshelf in the early half of the 20th century. So the concepts of astronomy, physics, chemistry, sound, electricity, atomic theory, and relativity. Let's throw it in there for the modern boy to get caught up on his relativity theory while he's simultaneously being reminded to wash his hands before he reads this book. Okay, so this is a book with a couple hundred pages. You can get it online for free. I should back up and just show you that. It's on archive.org. You can download it. Actually, I don't know if I can download the PDF, but I can view it all. And that's why I recorded the viewing here. You can view it all through their online viewer if you have an account on there and peruse it at your leisure. But there's the URL at the bottom. If you would so choose, I'll try to put that in the description. So, Boy Scientist, what's he learning? What was Grandpa learning in public school in New Jersey at that time, if he so chose to read this book? Well, he's learning about all of the modern scientists that impacted science over the last 500 years, including Galileo, talking about how the movement of things was, observable. And there are various things in this book that cover off foundational truths about the way our world operates, and observations, I should say, about the way the world operates. And this little, I like pictures, and you can't really, I'm not going to talk to a lot of the text in here, but I just wanted to touch on some highlights and get you inspired to go and read this yourself. There's a million books like this. There's a whole series, just like there was encyclopedia series. You might have had 4 feet worth of encyclopedia on a shelf back in the 80s. Well, you could have had the same thing just for learning about electronics or mechanics or woodworking or engineering, etc. But in this case, mathematics, it says up here, mathematics is an important tool to do science just as much as a hammer is to a carpenter. And so that's, often today, there's the trope that, kids don't like math because when am I going to use math? And it's well, you're going to use math every day of your life, hopefully. Otherwise, you won't know how to count. You won't know how to handle money. You won't know how to grow something that needs to be counted, etc. So there's lots of useful things there. But, mathematics is core to music. It's core to engineering. It's core to science overall. So if you miss out on one of those parts, how do you expect to understand the other things in very much depth? Now that applies to adults as much as kids. Right now, it's more important than ever to understand how the world works, especially how money works and how numbers work. If you don't know what, algorithmic interest growth, it looks like you might get hoodwinked into a mortgage you really can't handle later on. But in this book, the boy scientist is learning about some of the most important items, like the pendulum. He even shows a rudimentary pendulum clock design here, and which was fascinating for me because I didn't really know how the internal workings of a pendulum clock work. But just from this simple drawing, which is extremely high quality actually, you can see how the ratcheting wheel works here. And as this bar swings to the left, as the pictures are showing all the pendulum stuff, that little bar here flips down and ratchets down to the next thing and then pulls it up. And then those things turn other gears, which turn other gears, which turn smaller gears, and then turns some big clock face, for example. So even at this most basic level, just learning about leverage and the motion of bodies, you get into very useful mechanical movements. And that's one of the foundations, right? Understanding how things move through space, including in a vacuum. And they show examples of how things fall the same speed in a vacuum, no matter what their mass is. And they talk a little bit about how the speed of things changes depending on it compares velocity and acceleration, and all the formulas involved for computing that. Of course, one of the things that you learn as you get older is that there's formulas for everything. That if you want to calculate, how fast something will move based on its weight and the amount of momentum behind it, you can do that. If you want to calculate what frequency something vibrates at based on its size and the material it's made of, actually there's formulas even for that. So if you want to know, what frequency of sound would be required to break a wine glass, you can calculate that too. This is all, it's all codified, which means it's all been written down and it's all been analyzed to death. And, go into a simple science website that has formulas, go into an AI and ask for a formula, but get a reference that points to a website from the AI so you get the actual real knowledge. And you'd be laughing and learning. Shows a little bit about how the astronomy was used to calculate the motion of the heavenly bodies and understand the size and shape of the Earth. When you get into Newton and the laws of gravity, obviously foundational to understanding not just our world, but ultimately our entire cosmos and how heavenly bodies move around. Now look at this. There's a sketch of a space lab, you could say, or a space station. And that's funny because this book from the early 1950s is only a few years after the first rockets were launched from, say, White Sands base there. And the kids are already imagining, what it's going to be like in space. Now, I won't go dark mode and talk about how almost none of that's actually happened now, and that the space stations we have are nothing compared to one simple imaginative drawing from 1950 or even earlier. Anyhow, knowing how these things rotate around each other allows you to actually calculate what kind of trajectory and speed you need to remain in orbit. Stuff they were just learning about at this time. So even though this looks like an old book and it has some really, really old people in it, it's actually covering concepts that were on the bleeding edge. And that's what we found, that the texts of these days in the early 1900s had very practical, useful knowledge in simplified forms with basic formulas, little experiments with things you can try at home. Here's Newton's laws of motion, for example, first, second, and third, and you could learn those at home with a little practical experiment. Be encouraged about how that could be used into the future, and really inspire some kid to get into engineering or designing spaceships, for that matter, and understand the world around them. Compare and contrast that to a lot of what today has going for it in terms of popular science and popular mechanics. And I swear that if I open a popular science book today or magazine today, I'm almost absolutely positive, at least a quarter of it will be some of the same content that they had 30 years ago. A lot of the same things, same ideas, especially space exploration things, gets repeated over and over and just repackaged. Whereas back in that day, new stuff was being talked about and then being launched and then being created. And that's a philosophy that we need to adopt more, to bring kind of the old techniques of providing that foundational knowledge, building a useful applied knowledge to your daily life, and then improving products, improving the world, improving technology going forward. So that's what the kind of philosophy that this channel wants to bring forward. And books like this are a great example of that. Now, like I said, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of books that act like this, that teach the basics. Look at this. Even I'm learning names of inventors and observers that I've never even heard of as well, even though I've read a lot on these topics. We'll get into sound and vibration and resonance theory, because I'd like to do a bit of a live stream on that. If you're interested, let me know and comment that. We'll do like a live stream showing how resonance affects the flexibility of objects, even how it can create a destructive resonance force, like you hear about with old bridges and things like that broke just because of the wavelengths or frequency of the wind blowing across it. Anyway, very important fundamental concepts that as industrial revolution and stuff moves through and creates more and more products, you then have to understand different aspects of your world. Building a bridge is great. Everyone knows how to build a bridge with some logs. But once you build it out of metal, you build it out of girders, you build it, a 75 feet high so that it can create the arch that you want, you're dealing with a totally different resolution of physics. And to get into that is, it has to be a deliberate exercise. So just as our devices have become more complex, the products that have been produced are more complex. The physics, how it integrates with the world and with us, becomes more complex. And if you don't even have these foundational concepts, then there's no way for you to understand the second, third, and fourth level that's much higher. So that's why I would like to encourage you to pick up one of these old books. Heck, there's probably some good books at a book sale in your library in the back corner for a nickel. So you can even feel like it cost you a nickel like it did in 1955. So this book goes over the different inventors, but it also closes with I just want to find the closing chapter. Goes into Benjamin Franklin, goes into Einstein's theory of relativity. Benjamin Franklin and electricity. Goes into Becquerel, so it goes into radioactivity. So Becquerel might be a name you're not familiar with, but those are actually the units of measure for radiation exposure. So if you get a little badge because you're in a place where there's no radiation, it'll record how many becquerels you've been exposed to, or if you have radon detector in your home, then you get a recording or a number in becquerel units that tells you how much you've been exposed to radiation. Just as an aside, it's part of your life. These people's work is part of your everyday life. So it goes into into atomic theories and then into the theory of relativity in a little boy scientist book. So, inconsumable, explainable, plain language, brilliant drawings, very consumable and approachable information. So here's the part that I wanted to talk about or encourage people to think about. Tomorrow will bring new discoveries. We don't talk like that a lot today because so much seems like it's done, because we're not continuing to go further in this area, continuing to go further into space. I mean, we're continuing into the microscopic with quantum concepts and atomic concepts, but it's not as applied and not as approachable as technology development and engineering and physics was in the past. It's like a handful of people can do this work in a handful of laboratories around the world. What we need to do is start building up that knowledge in the garages, in the shops at the schools, in community laboratories, workshops, etc., so that children can start to learn early on that there's still more to discover. There's still, for example, even though there's less than 200 atomic elements in the periodic table, there's still undiscovered and untested combinations of those atomic elements to be discovered. The permutations and combinations of all the elements actually would lead to hundreds of thousands or millions of different potential combinations. And so we've barely scratched the surface when we talk about molecular chemistry, which I hope to get into more in another episode as well. So that's the boy scientist from 1955. I hope you'll come back and see the next iteration. We'll get into maybe some more videos, but I wanted to step back and just underline how important these books are, and I'm using them to pull experiments out that I'll kind of perform with you live on camera so we can learn a little bit together and have a little fun doing it. Thanks for tuning in. Next time.